At the beginning of the 21st century, Louisiana was governed by a Foster, just as it had been when the 19th century turned into the 20th century. The state in the 21st century faced a host of issues not unlike those faced by the people of Louisiana a century before: poor standards of living, poor race relations, poor education. Political corruption and grandstanding offered numerous challenges to the state. Only this time, the challenges and problems would result in two of the worst disasters in our nation's history, much less our state's history, and an unprecedented cry for true reform. In the year 2000, the U.S. Geological Survey estimated that the city of New Orleans was sinking at such a rate that it would cease to exist by the year 2100. It was sinking, and still is. In addition, there was rampant crime, poor education, poor employment prospects, a population drop, and strained race relations. These were the issues confronting the candidates as the gubernatorial election of 2003 took place. The candidates were Bobby Jindal, pious Bobby Jindal, a whiz kid who ran Medicaid for Foster, known as being a cutter and a slasher when it came to Medicaid. Hunt Downer, the former House Speaker and current general in the Louisiana National Guard at the time. Jay Blossman, a PSC, a Public Service Commissioner for the Democrats. Blossman made it open that he was courting David Duke, especially for his mailing lists, that he had a very good set of mailing lists from his 1991 campaign. Randy Ewing, the state Senate president. Richard Ayoub, the state attorney general, one of the first Arab Americans in Louisiana politics. You had Anthony Claude Buddy Leach and Kathleen Babineau Blanco, the lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana. At the end of the primary, it was Jindal and Blanco. Now, Jindal was endorsed by the Times-Picayune and also Mayor Ray Nagin of New Orleans, which was unusual. And, of course, Foster, who was Jindal's patron and rabbi. Blanco, though, won a very closely contested and heated race that had a great deal of race baiting, and what probably put Blanco over in the end was a political ad in which a U.S. veteran said that Jindal had cut his Medicaid. Jindal was also blamed for his refusal to answer questions about his record. Jindal took a very high, mighty approach. But what happened, many people think, is that at the time, and maybe still to this day, is that a significant number of people in Louisiana remain more comfortable voting for a conservative Democrat than they would for a Republican. Kathleen Babino Blanco was the first female governor ever in Louisiana. She was born in New Iberia, then moved to Franklin. She has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, which was formerly the University of Southwestern Louisiana, and before that it was Southwestern Louisiana Institute. She served as a state representative, a public service commissioner, lieutenant governor, and had very difficult working relations with the city of New Orleans. The Blanco program was the restoration and recruitment of business to the state. That was a very big and continues to be a big campaign promise, bringing business to Louisiana. She dedicated herself to securing the future of the New Orleans Saints franchise in New Orleans, because at this point Tom Benson was being courted about moving the team to another city, or perhaps moving it out of New Orleans to a geographic location more conducive to the entire Gulf Coast. She wanted to boost Caribbean trade, even with Cuba, and she wanted to increase educational opportunities. She was well known as the wife of Raymond Coach Blanco, the longtime booster and patron of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and many said that Coach Blanco was going to be dominating his wife. If ever there was a case of the wrong person at the wrong time, it was Kathleen Babino Blanco. During her administration, not one but two massive hurricanes hit Louisiana. Hurricanes Katrina and then Rita blasted Louisiana and basically for a time killed the city of New Orleans. Hurricane Rita destroyed southwestern Louisiana. Prior to the storms, Blanco declared the state ready for an emergency on August 27th. That is, all hands were on deck, all support services were in place, but then, perceiving that the storm would do great damage, asked President Bush for $9 million in aid. After the storm and the levee breach took place, she hesitated using the National Guard, and then ordered the Guard to shoot to kill looters. She delayed receiving additional Guard troops from other states because she was afraid that this would federalize the Guard and put it under the command of the president instead of herself. And there was political infighting with the Republican delegation over authority. As President Bush arrived in Louisiana, Senator Vitter and several of the Republican congresspersons argued strongly to put Bush completely in charge of things, and Blanco, citing the fact that she was the governor of the state, strongly resisted that. And this, of course, led to the great logjam. Homeland Security delayed allowing the Red Cross into New Orleans to help with evacuation and aid. But then Blanco negotiated a $4.2 billion package in federal aid for the Louisiana Recovery Act, which was later called the Road Home. But instead of giving the money directly to the citizens of Louisiana who had been affected, they gave it to the banks of Louisiana to distribute. And that became a major problem. And as a result of all this, Blanco was named worst governor in America. And when the time came for her to run for a second term in 2007, she chose not to run for a second term. And in New Orleans was the mayor, Clarence Ray Nagin. He was the former vice president and general manager of Cox Communications. He had a small-time interest in the New Orleans hockey team called the Brass at the time. He was elected as a Democrat on a pro-business reform campaign, an outsider, someone who had not been in politics before. He won a heated campaign against against former New Orleans police chief Richard Pennington. Pennington had been backed at the end by Jefferson. Nagin, of course, was a principal player in the Katrina fiasco, often prone to outbursts. After the storm came and went and the recovery began, he made a very controversial speech in which he called for New Orleans to return to being a chocolate city, which many people felt meant that he wanted it to be a black and black-dominated city. Despite all this, he was reelected in 2006 by a close margin over fellow Democrat Mitch Landrieu, and many people believe that white uptowners and older black women were the difference in this race. Nagin was a maverick. He often crossed party lines to endorse Republican candidates. He managed to engineer the resignation of Orleans District Attorney Eddie Jordan. Eddie Jordan, who had been elected district attorney, had gone into the DA's office and had fired every white worker in the office, leading to charges of not just discrimination, but also putting gross incompetence in charge and causing a backlog. And it got so bad that Jordan had to resign. Nagin, of course, himself would be implicated in corruption probes, and then later would be found guilty and sent to federal prison. And so as Louisiana approached 2010 and the next census, Louisiana had the exact same issues that confronted the state since its establishment as a colony: race relations, environmental issues, the overall culture, crime and corruption, business and opportunity, education, desire, that is, willingness to change. These are the problems that confronted Louisiana.